All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Anyways, so today I'll be talking about the show on Netflix called The Good Place. I think it's about 4 seasons. It's a very good show. I have to admit, I really like the show. There are moments of the show that are can be kind of like I lost interest in a little bit. Um, but I think for me, the getting to the end of the show is extremely worth it, mainly because it just one it closes it's a show that closes all it ties all the ends, it ties everything that it opens essentially, and it's also very extremely kind of sad, but it's not a kind of sadness that you would say, oh, this is a horrible show. It's a kind of sadness that you can still say it's a good show. It's worth watching. It's that kind of sadness. So anyways, just to kind of reveal the basic premise of The Good Place. The Good Place, initially, what you end up getting introduced is these characters die, and they enter what they call the good place. It's called the good place. What they end up discovering is that the good place that they're in is not actually a good place. They're actually in a bad place. And so when the characters discover that they are in the bad place and that they're not good human beings, um, they start discovering that this good place was kind of set up as a kind of experiment to um, torture them. That actually the good place disguised as that the bad place disguised as the good place is supposed to function as a kind of torture for the human beings, while they believe it is to be a good place. So Michael is this architect of the good place, but in reality, he is the architect of a bad place that he's trying to give this illusion of a good place. Meanwhile, all the characters get kind of like tortured through their own weaknesses, essentially. Whereas previously, typically the bad place is just supposed to be like this more grotesque torture, more physical torture, and so on. But Michael, the architect of the good place, that is actually the architect of the bad place, he's trying to present the good place as a kind of good place, but in reality, it is a bad place. He's trying to do this maneuver where he fools the characters into thinking that this is a good place, but actually it's hell, right? It's a bad place, and he's trying to fool them into this, and he's torturing them psychologically, and he tortures them psychologically by telling certain people that these people are your soulmates, and then they all think like, oh wow, this is the good place, so you must be my soulmate, and then they're being tortured by their soulmates because they think this is the good place and they think this is perfection. And so it's a wonderful philosophical kind of like representation of a problem about the way we think about perfection and the way we think about eternity. But anyways, I don't want to go through the entirety of the plot of the show. But anyways, some of the main kind of features of the show that I want to get to so I can talk about the end is that once the characters discover that this good place is not a good place, it's actually been a disguise for the bad place, they start working towards getting to the good place. And part of working towards getting to the good place is improving their character. And then they go through all the leaps of trying to challenge and understand that. And eventually they get to the good place, right? They get to the good place. And the good place finally becomes, they start discovering that everybody kind of is like a zombie in the good place. That the people running the good place have completely run out of ideas to how to entertain their subjects. They don't know how to entertain. They don't know how to give enjoyment anymore to the people that are living in the good place. They can have everything they want. It's all there. You can travel wherever you want. You can imagine anything you want. There's doors and there's places you can explore. You can literally do anything. And yet, in just a couple of 100,000 years, they have exhausted everything for themselves. And the thing that is still haunting for them in the good place is that they still have eternity to go. It's always eternity. And they don't know what else to do because they feel like at a certain point, trying new things is like the same thing. There's no difference anymore. And so what this kind of raises for all the subjects that are discovering that the pressure of the infinity is that, in my opinion, when you start looking at the characters, is that their own notions of perfection start torturing them. What do I mean by this? So I'm going to try to stay away from talking about infinity because I know people like to keep associating infinity with theological conceptions, but I'm just going to talk about perfection, and maybe this will make more sense and have less kind of like obstructive bias for if it's, if I'm alluding to a theological God or if I'm alluding into anything like that. I'll just talk about perfection. So the good place is told to them that everything is perfect. They can have anything they want. They can have unlimited enjoyment, basically. It's your enjoyment. Enjoy, right? This is the complete demand. Enjoy. What they end up discovering is that what you end up seeing is that their own. What is fascinating about this show is that even though they're told it's a good place and that everything is sort of like you can have everything you want, what you end up noticing is that their own interpretations of perfection is actually the thing that haunts them the most. Because when you start looking at the characters in The Good Place, some of their notions of perfection was, oh, I'm going to do everything that I've wanted to do. But what happens with that? Well, what ends up happening is that they feel like everything that they could do and want to do is now starting to blur into the same. And they start losing any motive to even want to do anything different because it's just the same. And because of their notion of perfection, they have nothing else. And so during the last season of the show, they were trying to solve this problem. And the only problem that they solved, the only way that they solved this problem was that let's put a limit on it. Let's let you work. Let's let you explore everything that you want to explore. And then there's this door when you feel like you're done, when you feel like there's nothing else left for you in the good place, when the enjoyment no more is there, you can just basically cut off your infinity. You can just end your infinity, right? If you just walk through this door, once you've exhausted all your possibilities, all your enjoyment, whatever, you can just cut it off by walking out this door, right? And so people celebrated about this fact that finally there was a way out of this infinity, right? But there's a couple of problems that, even though the show doesn't, the show is not going to tell you this, but there's a couple of problems that we can look at with this issue. One of the things that was curious to me about the show was that there's actually one character in the show. There's one character in the show that actually didn't decide to end their infinity, their eternity. They didn't decide to end it. And I was thinking, why did that one character never have the thoughts of ending their own eternity? And what I realized was that this character decided to maintain something. And this character, her name is Tahani. And what Tahani decided to do was that she decided to basically give herself work. And one of the things that kind of, basically kept maintaining her was that she said, you know what? I want to be able to learn how to maintain the good place. And at first the architect was like, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think we've ever taught a human how to maintain the good place. But she's like, please, just let me. I want to know. I want to be able to maintain the good place. And finally, they let that happen. And so Tahani is the only character that is essentially working and maintaining the good place. Everybody else in the good place is sort of just enjoyment. It's just pure enjoyment. And what you end up understanding with pure enjoyment is that the characters eventually just want to end it. That this pure enjoyment is a suffering, and it's a jouissance kind of thing. It's a suffering of enjoyment. They have unlimited enjoyment, and it's just miserable for them. And the only way that you can solve this unlimited enjoyment is by cutting it off, by saying, look, here's the door. Once you're done enjoying, once you feel like you enjoyed enough of eternity, you can just end it. You can end it here at this door. And so a lot of the characters that were working to get out of the good place, out of the bad place into the good place, eventually all do this, except Tahani. This is the part that really fascinated me, was the fact that it was one character that didn't have any reason to do this. And so it reveals to me that there's something about the pressures of eternity or perfection, or the way that we understand perfection, that if we understand perfection as a kind of just unlimited enjoyment, it's actually a kind of hell. But if we understand perfection as a kind of like maintenance, as a kind of work, then Tahani understood it well. And so you start understanding some of the dilemmas, even though this is utopia, right? This is utopia. But what's funny about utopia is that utopia is not going to tell the subject how they should perceive utopia, how they should understand utopia. But the instinctual understanding of utopia should almost be like pure enjoyment. And typically what you end up discovering in the show is that those are the first ones to go. Those are the first ones that just want to end it right there. They want to end their eternity. It's too miserable. It's too torturous for them. But there is actually, besides Tahani, there is actually one other character that presents another answer besides work and maintenance. This character, her name is Eleanor. And Eleanor, surprisingly enough for me, her enjoyment was in relation to her partner, which is something ironic because it's actually something that the utopia could not provide, if that makes any sense. Because remember, her partner, or the person that she's fallen in love with, technically the good place doesn't provide you with your partner. She met her partner in the bad place. And they grew up and they fell in love multiple times, actually. And that's part of the show that you can watch and understand what do I mean by multiple times. But it's ironic that Eleanor, the thing that sustains Eleanor, was actually her love for her partner. What was heartbreaking towards the end was that her partner no longer had any reason to stay in the good place anymore. That he saw a moment of what he considered perfection, and from then on out, it was just pure depression. It was just pure torture, pure miserableness. And so, and the character's name is Chidi. And so Chidi decides he wants to go. And Eleanor begs him to not go. But Eleanor, because she ended up in the bad place for her selfishness, says that she's going to let him go, right? She's not going to keep him for her own selfishness. Now, why is it that I bring up Eleanor as a kind of interesting problem rather than Tani, which seems more like a clear cut, like, oh yeah, you just have to work and maintain? Eleanor is an interesting problem to the answer of the existential questions in The Good Place, because for me, Eleanor wasn't concerned about enjoyment. Eleanor enjoyed Chidi. She enjoyed everything. She enjoyed being with Chidi. Anything that they did, that was her real enjoyment, which was this ironic twist, because actually The Good Place can't really offer you Chidi. You know what I mean? It can't offer you a lover in a real sense. So I can imagine that Eleanor would have never walked through that door to end her eternity if Chidi would have found some type of way to maintain himself in eternity. So there's a couple of, so now we come across these interesting themes of the fact that both love and work as love and love as work, at least in the way that I'm analyzing The Good Place, seems to be one of the only answers to maintain, to confront the overwhelming meaninglessness and abundance of eternity, which for the subject is interpreted as perfection. That this is perfect. This is it. That's it. This is perfect. But the moment that they say it's perfect, it obliterates them. It annihilates them, the characters. They no longer want to stay and confront eternity, because their notion of perfection itself is finite. And so it's fascinating to me that these characters are in a place of eternity, and yet their notions, their understanding of that infinity is itself finite. And that the only ones that can possibly survive this overwhelming abundance are those that decide to maintain perfection rather than obliterating and demarcating perfection. So yeah, I overall I really love the show. It definitely made me cry and my friends cry, and there was this moment, where Chidi and Eleanor are talking, and they're watching the sunset. It's really emotional. It's super emotional, and but that's when you realize that Eleanor could have easily stayed in eternity if Chidi was there. But ironically enough, that's the one thing that The Good Place could not offer. The Good Place could not offer Chidi to they could not offer Chidi to Eleanor. One, because Chidi had to earn his way to the good place, and the same thing with Eleanor. Eleanor had to earn her way to the good place. And so we do really come across some interesting issues in the Good Place, that not with the show, but interesting philosophical problems, existential problems that the Good Place sort of reveals to us and our understandings of perfection, our understandings of eternity. But it seems like our understandings of perfection, our understandings of eternity, seem to be always finite in themselves. Despite your own immortal bodies. This is a very interesting question, because even if we reach an age in society where you can live forever, it does not solve the overwhelming pressure of our finite determinations of things. That's what's fascinating to me, is that we can live forever. Fine. Let's accept that. Let's just accept that we can reach a point in society that we can live forever. Let's just accept that. I'll go with that premise. What's fascinating to me is that that won't stop people from throwing themselves off buildings because they know they can live forever. So what they're going to do, instead of dying by natural causes, they're going to literally off themselves in a very purposeful way, because now you can no longer die by natural causes, by death, by disease, by destruction. You have to do something to take yourself off. And this means that we did not answer. We did not fully comprehend the infinite. We did not fully comprehend the eternity. That means that our understanding of eternity, despite it actually being imminent, right? The fact that maybe you can live forever. And yet, what is still daunting to the subject is that his understanding of the infinite is finite. He demarcates it, he determines it. And that determination is also what ironically obliterates him. And to me, this is what I took out of The Good Place. That despite everything being met, despite that you can ask for anything, it's infinite. Infinite. The one thing that The Good Place doesn't offer you is your understanding of that infinite. That everybody is tasked with relating to the infinite. Depending upon the way that you relate to the infinite, it can either save you, persist you, or completely annihilate you. And to me, this is really kind of what the existential kind of ends of The Good Place make you reflect upon. That The Good Place cannot offer you a notion of the infinite. They just tell you it's perfect. Everything's perfect. Everything's good. You should be happy. But you see how, even though The Good Place offers this, the subject still has to, in some sense, interpret and give a notion of that perfection and a notion of that happiness. And if the subject decides that this is perfection as a kind of ultimate end, they annihilate themselves immediately. They have committed basically a kind of Camus philosophical suicide that eventually leads to an actual suicide. That now that you can no longer die by just natural causes, disease, and so on, now you just have to commit suicide. That's the only answer now. And so when we talk about AI, and we talk about all these wonderful developments in technology and health and so on, that yes, we could live forever. Fine, we can live forever. But guess what? That doesn't stop the impending doom of our finite notions in the face of the infinite. And to me, that is what is truly terrifying. That depending on the way the subject interprets infinity, he can either save himself, persist in eternity, or completely annihilate himself in the face of eternity. So yeah, that's the end of my reflections. But anyways, it's a really good show. You don't have to think about it in the depth that I thought about it. I will admit, except towards the end, it really does kind of make you question in the end. Despite it being a really enjoyable show, and it's humorous and it's lovable. Really love the show. It's definitely going to go down as one of my favorite shows for sure. And it definitely adds a little bit more favoritism, noticing that really the end of the show kind of gives a kind of richness in terms of its persistence to help you think through this problem. But again, you don't have to think. You don't have to think eternity. You don't have to. You can just enjoy the show. And with that being said, I really think it's an enjoyable show. I think it's entertaining. It's wonderful. It's very beautiful, in fact. Yeah, that's it. All right, guys, take care.